Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome back to Senate Education. It's January 12th at 2:41. We're going to pick up now the conversation we had yesterday on what's happening in our schools as it relates to COVID. And senators will recall, we heard from some individuals who were on the ground. We also heard from Secretary French and Commissioner Levine about the policy shift that has been rolled out over the past few days, as well as we heard from Jeff Fannin from the NEA. We're now going to switch a little bit our attention to the Principals Association, school boards, superintendents, and then closing remarks from Dr. Benjamin Lee, who is a physician, pediatric infectious disease physician, and somebody that I understand the agency and others have consulted with on a number of different issues related to COVID. So I think we'll start it with Mr. Nichols. Good to see you. Thanks for being with us. I believe, yes, you were there yesterday, and I'm sorry that we couldn't get to you yesterday, Jay.
No problem.
Ran out of time, but eager to hear what you're hearing from your members on the ground as it relates to this rollout, and any concerns or supports you might have. That would be helpful.
Great. I'll only take a few minutes and there'll be time for other people and you can ask any questions you might have. And I will say that on the sports end of the VPA, Dr. Lee has worked with us a lot. You will be very impressed with him. He's very informed and really.
Did you say on the sports? Did you say sports? Yeah. Athletic?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
He's been great. Yeah.
That's
so
great.
For the record, Jay Nichols, Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association. I spoke to Senator Campion on either Saturday or Sunday, and he asked me to talk to school leaders about their thoughts regarding new guidance as reported by 7 Days and others on changes to how contact tracing will be managed in schools. He also asked what the legislature could do to help, including potentially closing schools for a week or something along those lines to sort of reset, given the major negative impact COVID is having on school attendance, both for students and staff. So this weekend, I spoke to our 15-member executive council, which is the governing body of the VPA. It consists of a retired principal, an assistant principal, a technical center director, and 12 active elementary, middle, and high school principals. And here's the basic summary of our thoughts today. In terms of the change from school to parental testing, the summary was basically a wait and see approach. We need to see how this plays out because some schools won't be ready to pivot to this until next week, probably. It'll depend on having the test resources necessary to do it. Leaders do appreciate that this will likely support operational functionality in school buildings and allow school nurses, school principals, and other school officials to no longer have to spend so much time as de facto public health officials. We understand that what schools were currently being asked to do was not sustainable, and people were really at the breaking point. And we also appreciate Secretary French signaling to us last Friday that these changes were going to take place. In terms of a reboot or restart, we feel that this should be done at the local level only as a last resort when schools cannot safely staff their schools. Students need to be in school in person to the degree possible. This is especially critical for our most vulnerable children, so we really do not want to see schools closed. However, school superintendents, in consultation with school principals, should be able to pivot to remote learning for short periods of time when they cannot staff their schools, and those days should count as school days. Extending the required school year is a non-starter for principals because they point out that morale is low and teachers and other staff are absolutely physically and emotionally exhausted. And last summer, it was very hard trying to get people to work extra. We can't imagine what this summer is going to be like. Test shortages are also a big concern. For this new way of testing students to work, schools will need all the tests necessary to ensure students, families, and staff that they have the tests as soon as they need them. And we believe this needs to include, as necessary, vaccinated students and staff, as well as the unvaccinated. And finally, we agree with Jeff Fannin and Vermont NEA that schools also need to have high access to high quality masks for students and staff. I would love to see us have high quality masks given out in every school in the state and not rely on parents to send kids to school with cloth masks, for example. And that's my testimony. I'll take any questions you have, and I will send the written testimony to Daphne.
Thanks, Mr. Nichols. I'll just kick it off quickly, if senators don't mind. High quality masks. So one of the things we heard from the Agency of Education, and something I'm trying to figure out, and I think others are as well, is should this happen again at the local level where, all right, such and such school or such and such district should buy these masks and distribute them, or should this be coming from the agency? I mean, on the face of it, it seems as though we should be almost instructing all of the districts and supervisory unions to purchase and distribute. Would just love to know your thoughts on that.
So I have a hybrid response. I think most school districts have plenty of money to be able to buy these and that they should do so. Where I'd like to see the state intercede would be if there was a school district, for whatever reason, didn't have enough ESSER funds left to be able to do this. A, and B, to help pave the way if there's a school district that doesn't really know what they need to do to get high quality masks. I know at the school where my grandson goes, where I actually coach their junior high basketball team, they have masks as you walk into the lobby that anybody can grab and take a mask. They're not N95s, but they're pretty good quality surgical masks. And I think more and more schools are doing that. And I think that's a good strategy.
It's interesting. Yesterday, I don't know if it was Dr. Levine or Dr. Fauci on NPR. It sounded like taking a cloth and then putting on top the surgical mask, but neither just on its own. And then N95 sounds like the ideal. Okay.
You got Ben Lee coming in. He's the guy to ask about all that. He will know.
I usually go to you, Jay, with all my medical questions, but I will print this for Dr. Lee.
Nice.
Other questions for Mr. Nichols? Senator Lyons.
Yeah, it's just one question, and that is, how many schools are right now requiring masks all the time for staff and students?
To my knowledge, every school in the state of Vermont is, with the exception of one. And I
So
think
it's
the
still
vast
the
majority,
same.
what's
Yeah.
that?
It's still the same,
Yes.
that one
Yeah.
school? Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Do you have a
Thank
follow-up,
you.
Senator Lyons?
No, that's good. Thank you.
You know, it was interesting yesterday. Pat Pennock said that, you know, one of the concerns that people are going to have, and I get it, you know, some teachers or some parents might not test. It's on the honor system. You test positive, all of a sudden it really does disrupt your life. And I get that. I mean, you can't go to the grocery store, you're not going to be able to go to work, etc. So I know I suspect you also share that concern. It's one of those things. I don't know what we can do about it. If there's anything that you're thinking, if you have sort of an estimate on how much of a problem that might cause. Just any comments?
Yeah, I don't have any estimate, but the comment is going to be basically the same thing that Dr. Levine has said right along. You're going to have some people that don't follow the rules. So that's why it's more important that you really make sure you follow the rules yourself. If you're double masked or you have a very safe mask and you take other mitigating strategies, the chances of you getting it from somebody else infected, unless you're in close proximity to them and they're not masked at all, are very slim. And Dr. Lee can talk about that too, but he's told us right from the very beginning that you need to look at it like layers, pardon the pun related to masks, but the more things that you do right, the less chance you've got of getting this thing. Or if you do get it, getting it bad. So being vaccinated, being up to date with boosters, wearing masks, taking mitigation strategies, those things all together are the key.
Yeah. Helpful. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Nichols? Really appreciate it, Jay. If you're able to stick around, great, but also realize that you might have to get going. Ms. Zeglowski, I believe you're up next. Great to see you. Hope you're doing well.
Yes, I am. Thank you. I hope you are too.
And thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, I'm Sue Zeglowski, Executive Director of the Vermont School Boards Association. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide a COVID update from the school board perspective. The current situation, as you've heard from many people with Omicron, is very dynamic, and we're having new information that's coming out, if not on an hourly basis, on a daily basis at least. And I know you've heard the word challenging a lot in the last 2 years. I'd say this is getting to be like challenging with a capital C. So there's a lot happening. Just wanted to let you know that we agree with previous witnesses that with the change in the approach that was previewed by the Agency of Education last Friday, that it's critically important to provide rapid tests for all students and staff, regardless of their vaccination status. The preview that Secretary French gave on Friday indicated that only unvaccinated students and staff could get rapid test kits from the schools unless they were symptomatic, in which case they could be tested right on site. During yesterday's press conference, and I think in his testimony to you as well, Dr. Levine indicated that test kits will be available to both unvaccinated and vaccinated students and staff. We do understand, though, that there may be a supply issue involving the rapid test kits. So we're really interested in learning more about how that is going to be addressed. I would also note that last night, the Biden administration announced that it's increasing the supply of COVID-19 tests for schools in the effort to keep schools open for in-person learning. And there were some news reports that I heard this morning indicating that the administration is going to increase the number of COVID tests available to schools by 10 million per month, 5 million rapid tests and 5 million PCR tests. I don't know how many tests of those tests will be coming to Vermont under that program. Regarding masks, we also agree with previous witnesses that high quality masks that are effective during this particular Omicron surge should be available to all staff and students. And I'll just finish up by saying we're looking forward to seeing the formal guidance around Vermont's new approach for the testing involving schools. It is challenging to comment on the changes when we don't have all the details of the changes. We definitely understand that the situation on the ground is changing frequently, and also just observe that receiving a preview on Friday that the guidance is forthcoming, and then being here on Wednesday and it hasn't been issued yet just makes the situation a bit more challenging. So that concludes my testimony. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ms. Siglowski. Questions for Ms. Siglowski? Yes, Senator Hooker.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Siglowski. Could you comment on how the school boards feel about who should be providing the masks? I mean, that's been a question.
We don't have a specific position on that, but I think what that Jay Nichols' remarks made a lot of sense, that there are many districts that have the funds, the ESSER funds to purchase them, and they are doing that, and that the agency, it would be helpful for the agency to help any districts that aren't in that position, and also possibly to just provide some guidance on the types of masks that would be recommended for schools to use. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's really helpful. So do you have a sense right now, Ms. Siglowski, and I'm not sure if this would be a question for you or not, but what Jay said about not knowing where to go to make the purchase, do you have a sense of whether or not your school board members, well, I'm guessing it's really going to be Mr. Francis who will answer this for us, I suspect, but superintendents, do you just generally have a sense out there, I guess, of, is there going to be opposition from school boards to buying masks in terms of cost? Do you see anything? Is this on people's radar, that sort of thing?
I have not heard any of that type of opposition from anyone, from any school board members.
Other questions for Ms. Siglowski at this point? I'm hoping you can stick around, Sue, while Jeff also talks, because I think there might be some overlap in some of these questions and how we might make sure that masks get into students' and faculty's hands as quickly as possible.
I'd be happy to stick around.
Okay, great. Okay, Mr. Francis, thanks for joining us.
Sure, good afternoon. I want to check my audio, but because despite the fact that I live in Montpelier and have high-speed internet, sometimes it's a problem. Is it okay right now?
It's great.
Okay. If at any point it starts to not get great, let me know and I'll take off the video.
Okay, thanks.
First of all, thank you very much for devoting this time this week to this testimony. The weekend was disruptive, as you all know. It's a challenging transition, but I've listened to the explanations from the public health experts and Secretary French. And I think that it's a transition that is necessary given Omicron. In terms of the comments that have been made by Jay and Sue so far, I would be redundant if I repeated them, but from the Superintendent's Association perspective, we're in agreement with what you've heard already. I want to make one comment about your question, Senator Campion, about pivoting to remote. And I think that it would be appropriate for the General Assembly to take a look at the school calendar legislation that's currently on the books and take a look at number of days in total, remote and in person. Secretary French explained that right now school is either open or it's not, and that's the basis on which he has to make decisions for waivers. But I think that the General Assembly would serve the public education community well if it took a look at whether or not the minimum in-person days should be modified for this year, and consider in that deliberation how to regard remote. And I say that with an absolute awareness that we know that in-person education is far more effective than remote education. But when you consider the extension late into the year in order to comply with the law, I think that would have detrimental effects on the entire education community in a manner that ought to be considered by the General Assembly. And the reason that I say that, I knew all along, but it came to me when I listened to Lynn Coda's testimony yesterday, and also Patrick Pennick's, Principal Pennick's testimony. And you've had the advantage of hearing 3 superintendents talk about what this COVID navigation has been like. And you heard from Principal Pennock yesterday. And what occurred to me is that there are 54 superintendents in Vermont. They all could tell a very similar story. And there are around 300 principals. They could all tell a similar story. And the teachers who you're hearing from as constituents with regard to the challenges that they're facing, there are more than 10,000 NEA members in Vermont, and we're all living it. And it's become almost trite to talk about the impact of this pandemic, but I have occasion to see the communications on a daily basis that go back and forth between Secretary French and school superintendents. And the amount of work that's going into this and the burden that it's taking on people, I don't think can be overstated. And I know you all know that, but I think it helps to say it as much as we possibly can, because people have really, really risen to the occasion. And when I saw I think it's, to talk about what transpired in the transition over the weekend and what the reactions were to it, I was not surprised by the reactions. I mean, there were a lot of real stress and strain that were exhibited through social media, in testimony, through reactions from organizations. And to me, that's symptomatic of the pandemic. That's not really a reflection on people's attitude or effort. I think everybody's doing absolutely the best that they can. It manifests itself in all kinds of really detrimental and devastating ways. And that's what the nature of the pandemic is. But when you consider that force in the context of public policy making, including at the level of the General Assembly, I think really what we need to focus on is helping every entity participating with the navigation and lightening the load to the extent we can in order to get through this.
I'm going to just ask you to pause right there just for a
Yeah.
second, Mr. Francis, because Senator Chittenden has had his hand up, and I just want to.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, it's entirely on this point, and I got to say it's very meaningful to hear you say this, and I'm of the same mind. The question I would ask you to maybe expound upon is, we just fast-tracked a bill regarding town meeting day because of the pandemic circumstances that we're in right now. I ask of you, I agree that I think lowering the number of minimum days, as Secretary French testified yesterday that we have already done twice in this pandemic, is important to do. And if we all agree that it's important to do, would you think we also need to do that as soon as possible and possibly fast track this so that these school districts, weighing the circumstances that they find themselves in, should hear that the legislature is working on giving them that breathing space so that they can in fact send people home or have people convert to remote more quickly without the fear of possibly going into the summer months? Like, what degree of urgency would you impose upon us in order to address this, which I agree to your point?
Yeah, I hope this doesn't sound like a contradictory response. Yes, I think it should be fast-tracked. I believe that it deserves deliberation, which I know you'll give it. I think that there needs to be a lot of consideration for the relative value of in-person versus remote. And I also support and appreciated Dan French's testimony, at least my interpretation of it, is that the decision at the local level needs to be deliberative and well thought through, right? So in all matters of public policy, there's always a concern that if you don't get it right, people will take advantage of it, which is not, those words are never spoken by me in the context of public education, because I've got a lot of confidence in the decision makers. But I think that everybody else's confidence needs to be well placed also. So, the sweet spot would be to get parties involved and come up with something that does provide the relief that I'm speaking of, but passes muster in terms of what the process requirements are. And, it's a little complicated, but Dan French is preparing to accept waiver requests, which under the provisions under which he operates, he'll start to do in February. People are already building their cases. In fact, the AOE is now collecting data on school closures, all pointed to the same thing. But in my view, and I would say in the view of my association, there are going to be districts, because of the circumstances of the pandemic, that have to make legitimate decisions to close school. It's going to make it difficult for them to attain that 175. And that's what we ought to be looking at. So it's a long-winded way of answering your question with a single word, which is yes.
Quick follow-up, Chair.
Yeah, please.
So with what I just heard you say, and what little I know being the new person around here, I feel like we'll get muddled if we start trying to define standards around remote days. I wonder if we might want to focus our energies instead on doing exactly what we did last year in lowering that 175 days to tell me a number, Mr. Francis, 165 required in-person days, leaving it to the districts to define remote without us dragging that through the legislative process. Just for this 1 year. I just wonder if the remote day deserves much more deliberation than what this pandemic is allowing for where we are.
That's a great question and a great point. I don't want to prolong this, but I would be, I wouldn't want to give you an answer today. I would want to confer with superintendents and with colleagues in the education community and see what they think based on experience. But I like that direction as a direction.
For example, just for my clarification, saying, all right, in-person days this year really should be 150 instead of 175, that kind of thing. Mr. Francis,
sorry.
Yeah.
I think that my opinion based on what I've heard and seen is that would be too low, but that's
sure. But do you have a sense, and this might be for Secretary French, and he's coming in later to talk to us about another bill, but we can surprise him with a few questions. Does that interfere with anything that's happening at the federal level? In other words, with Secretary Cardona and the guidelines that the feds are putting out, or all these kinds of things, just, state by state?
Yeah, I'm not well versed in the federal regulations, but
Okay.
I do try to apply pragmatic thought process, right? So if the conditions of the pandemic legitimately preclude school from being in session, and a school district, any school district in the state was looking at extending the school year into July as the
Yeah.
result of inability to hold school, and you were faced with communicating that to educators and families who are tremendously stressed, you would want to avoid that. So it seems to me that the sweet spot would be arriving at a threshold that allows us to represent that the pandemic has been treated seriously, the condition of our educational workforce has been treated seriously, and this is a decision that makes sense given those factors. So I think it's something that could be accomplished. I think it would require testimony by people who have presumably more expertise than I do. But I appreciated Senator Chittenden's question, because I think it's the kind of thinking that has been applied and needs to be applied as we try to get through this.
And just bringing us back to last year and the year before, all of those decisions were made by the administration. Remember, they were not decisions that we took testimony on. I don't recall. I mean, I believe they were all executive orders.
Yeah, I think that's my recollection as well, but I could be corrected on that.
Not that I don't recall us taking, I think everything was executive order. So that's what I'll have. We'll talk a little bit about this, but I think maybe the best way to at least continue the conversation is to have Jim DeMarais come in and give us our options, have him sort of pull this apart and say, all right, given federal law, given et cetera.
And
And
then
then that'll also give senators, I'm sorry, what?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to augment one more point that Jay and Sue made, but why don't I'll stand down, and sorry to interrupt you.
No, I was just going to say, we would have Jim probably in by Friday at the latest, and with his schedule and everyone's, again, it would just give us a couple options. It would also give individuals like yourself and others time to reach out to the Secretary of French and see if this is a real concern, which it sounds like it is. If everybody is on the same page, the principals, superintendents, teachers, etc., it seemed ideally this would happen by way of executive order from where I'm sitting. Taking 3 days of testimony on something, of course, which is important, but there are other things that it would not allow us to get to. So I just, if there is another way to peel this onion, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. On the mask question that you asked about, my view is similar to Jay and Sue's. I think that schools have the monetary resources. They may not all have the central office capacity to sort of expedite their acquisition. So in my mind, it ought to be sort of a hybrid model, as I think how Jay referred to it. School districts should rely on their own capacities, but they also ought to have a place to call if they run into trouble. And I think that it's a role that the AOE is pretty good at. So the emails that, that I'm privy to, I sometimes see questions go to the AOE. How do we procure this or acquire that? And, the AOE is highly responsive in instances like that. Sometimes the answer is, there's a supply chain problem, but they get back to school districts with assistance.
But do you know, Mr. Francis, if an email has been sent to superintendents, and I believe it's superintendents that would do this purchasing, to indicate, hey, this is the site you're going to go to, this is where you're going to buy the masks, this is the best kind of mask. Has that been sent,
The AOE, and that again is a question for Secretary French. My belief is that superintendents are well informed with regard to sources. I don't know, frankly, but you could find out whether, what the advisability is with regard to particular
Sure.
types of equipment. But my belief is that that has been covered. Yeah.
Okay, I see
In other
Mr.
words-
Nichols is going to weigh in on this as well. Go ahead, Jay.
I know that some school nurses have received emails telling them where they can purchase stuff, just because I've happened to talk to a couple in the last couple of days.
Okay, good to know. It was raised a few witnesses ago that, we want to make sure people have know where to go and make it as easy as possible for folks. So that sounds like it's happening. We can talk to Secretary French when he comes in.
Yeah, and along those lines, and I'll wrap up my testimony this way. I think that the challenges in terms of the navigation of the pandemic have not at all been associated with the responsiveness of the AOE. It's been with the difficult of the navigation of the decision-making process, right? So in my view, the agency sits at the nexus between the schools and the decision-making apparatus within the administration of the state government. And when you've got multiple parties involved, it's not always smooth sailing, and you're not always getting the answer that you hope for in terms of your particular circumstance. And there are superintendents who would be critical, of the administration based on some of the decisions that have been made, the timing in which it's been made. But in my observation, folks have risen to the occasion pretty much universally across the board, and everybody's putting their best effort in. That's my observation.
Could we trouble you, Mr. Francis, to really take the temperature out there with our friends at 2 Prospect around, just going back to the question of number of school days, and maybe loop back to us on Friday, and we can have Daphne have you in just to get a sense of where everybody's at. We'll have Jim Demaray in on Friday also, just to let us know some of those options.
Sure. I have a conflict on Friday, but I'll talk with Jay and Sue. Maybe one of them
great.
can, we can send you something.
Yeah. So we haven't, I just saw in the chat, Senator Chin wants to know what 2 Prospect is. Unfortunately, we can't tell you unless you get reelected. So for that first term, that is not allowed, but hopefully next year you'll find out. 2 Prospect is where the group, Mr. Nichols, Mr. Francis, Ms. Zaglowski, they all have offices. And I don't know if the NEA is located there as well, but sometimes we refer to that group as our friends at 2 Prospects. So.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and we will get back to you on that.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. Any questions for either Ms. Zaglowski, Mr. Francis, or Mr. Nichols before we move on? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have Dr. Lee coming in about 15 minutes, but it sounds to me that, at least from Senator Chittenden, would like to continue the conversation about school days and whether or not that's something we might advance through the agency or in this committee. Wondering if there are any other things, and some of this might come out after talking with Dr. Lee, that really, I guess I'm asking, people have concerns with the rollout or the management as it related to what AOE and the Department of Health are doing right now. I think rightfully so, people are looking for us on this. Senator Perchlik.
Yeah, I had asked that question about the masks of Secretary French and Dr. Levine. And at the time, Secretary French's answer was like, yeah, basically the school should do it. They have the money and they can figure it out and they can do it faster. But I wondered if there was a role for the state of just being more helpful. And I think part of the concern that we're hearing from the schools is that they just feel like they're getting told what to do without getting the help. And I think even if the schools could do it just as well as the state, and the Department Agency of Education is also overwhelmed and understaffed, but it just seems like trying to help the schools as much as we can as the state, even, even if it's small things to say, hey, we're here to get your back. We're helping you out, not just telling you what to do. And I think that's, what we heard from the NEA. A lot of it was just about the messaging that they were angry about. So I think the same with the masks. If they just did a little bit of the work and say, here are the best masks, or here's what we recommend. You don't have to get them from us, but we could do a bulk buy. Maybe they could get them cheaper, and then distribution. Maybe it is more complicated, but I just thought, as much as the state can say, hey, we're here to help out the schools and not just send it to them, or just the way it's messaged is important for sure.
I think that's a great point. I think it seems to me that if there are individual deliveries to schools, it makes it also the easiest. In other words, if everything were sent to Montpelier or Barry, then it's the distribution piece. But to say, yes, these are the best masks. This is the way to go about it. And just again, like you said, message, we're here to, if they don't come on time, we also have a supply. We can get, we can help you. I think you're right. I think it'll go a long way. And we can ask Dan about that. Senator Hooker?
Yeah, I know I don't have to say it, and everybody's aware that the crisis is now. And I worry, I want to go back to Senator Chittenden's recommendation about lowering the number of school days. We can do it through the process, and it's going to take a while. But the administration can do it kind of like waving that magic wand. And I think we need to consider that and perhaps find a way, as you said, Senator Campion, of peeling this onion in a way that would be more timely, so that schools know now whether or not these days that they're not in person are going to count.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. I agree. It would take, it's going to take testimony, and it's going to take time in the House also, and then it's going to get whether or not the governor signs it or sticks with the policy, because we really are saying you're not managing this, and we're going to take this into our own hands. And if we're going to take something like this into our own hands, it is going to take a little while. But I think Mr. Francis being willing to touch base with the VPA, school boards, NEA, et cetera, and then coming back to us on Friday, if everyone is speaking again, off the same page, that's going to certainly give us a bit of, I don't know if it's authority, but strength to say to the agency and the governor's office, hey, we're all in agreement that this needs to change. Senator Lyons. You're muted, Senator.
I'm good. I was going to say, if it gets signed by the governor, we can always put language in that makes it retroactive, so everyone sees the retroactivity of it. But this is a difficult one. So I think encouraging the AOE to do something would be great.
Yeah. No, it is tough. I understand where Senator Chittenden and others are coming from. It's also managing something from the legislature. It is a vote of no confidence, and whether or not, we can pull that off and have the support, and then have the governor's support, it could take a lot of time. So I think, we try to figure it out through AOE and with the help of our folks at Chief Prospect. So let's see how it goes. And we'll talk to Jim also about the options. Yeah, Senator Chittenden.
Just to be clear, I didn't mean to put this forward as a vote of no confidence in anybody. So all I'm saying is I think this is worth us taking up, and the administration is reacting as much as we are. So I hope that they see value in looking at maybe lowering this to 165 or something else.
Sure. Anything else? All right, we'll just stretch our legs for a minute. Dr. Lee should be here in about 7 or 8 minutes. Thank you.